I know tonight is about you all spending time together, but we wanted to take this moment, rather than pull you in at another date, just to recognize the challenges that this class has faced over the last 16 months. And I'm here as the Director of Athletics to thank you for all you did. And I'm here because we went back and counted, and over 90% of you participated in at least one sport during your time at the upper school. And I want to say thank you for doing that. I've worked at schools where they forced students to participate in athletics. It's not a good culture, and this is a great culture, and I'm really happy that so many of you took advantage of it. You haven't had tailgates this year. You didn't get a spring tailgate last year. And thankfully, things have opened up enough. I was just at the baseball game today, and it was awesome to see many of you cheering on the baseball players who are graduating alongside with you. It's great to have fans back, so thank you for doing that. And really, I'm just here to let two people talk with you, two people who you like way more than you like me, and two people who I know have a great message to share. And as soon as they're done with their message, I have one final thing to say to you, and then the rest of the night is yours. So without further ado, two amazing coaches here at Lakeside, girls lacrosse program head Jamie Asaka and football program head Mike Lengel.
Thank you. It begins. Thank you, Mr. Hartley, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak. Jamie and I were asked to come speak to everybody today about just life, man. Life, you know? Chris, I think, thought that if there's any two people that have lived amazing, motivational, inspirational lives, it's probably us two. So, Jamie and I thought we would share similar but separate messages with you guys that we think could be helpful. Otherwise, they might just be fun stories for you to hear. So, Ms. Asaka is going to go first.
Thanks. Well, seniors, what an amazing time. The weather was beautiful when I was writing this, and now it's not terrible, but it's a little chilly. Things are wrapping up, and a lot of people are celebrating you and will be celebrating you. For me, this time of year, and the spring in general represents a lot of joy and happiness, and this is mostly because I get to coach lacrosse. Lacrosse has been in my life every spring since I was 15 years old, so 28 years. So quick, do the math, you'll know how old I am. But the first time I ever heard about lacrosse, actually, was from my classmates at Lakeside. And my friends Heidi and Sarah and Jennifer were walking down the path, like right here in front of Moore. And they were looking like they were headed to practice. And it turned out they were trying out for a spring sport, something I never heard of, called lacrosse. And they asked me to come. And I was actually dreading going home. This was typical for me. I hated doing homework, and I would literally do anything to get out of it. So I told my grandpa, who came to pick me up, that I wanted to try this new thing called lacrosse, and off I went. To be honest, I had no clue what I was getting myself into. I had no gear. I think I might have thrown on my PE shoes. I just knew I was going to be able to postpone homework, and maybe now I'd have some excuses of why I couldn't get things in on time. But in typical Jamie fashion, I would blame all these things on my sports commitments, and that was the end of my freshman year in high school. Prior to that, I had played on the JV soccer team in the fall and was considering playing basketball when everything kind of came to a screeching halt for me, and depression and anxiety became my number one opponent. And back then, they didn't have a ton of treatment options for teens, but I did know that exercise and connections with others would be very important. And that's probably why my mom and stepdad actually supported my lacrosse interest, so I guess it was helpful for me for that as well, beyond just getting out of homework. In my 10th grade year, anxiety and depression continued to be my number one opponent, and I dragged my way through soccer in the fall. I didn't do basketball, and then I found my way into the lacrosse field. And to be honest, most of that year was a blur. But what I did realize was that making connections with players on my Lakeside soccer and lacrosse teams, and Lakeside sports in general, were becoming my biggest motivator. In 11th grade, I was running around campus, yelling and screaming about something, when Sandy Schneider, the former girls basketball coach, who worked here for years and probably taught and coached many of you, she just retired last year, she pulled me aside and asked me to A, stop swearing, B, to calm down, C, to focus, and then she asked me if I wanted to be the manager of the varsity basketball team. The basketball team back then was the bomb. It still is. But they were ranked in the top 15 in the country. They were USA Today featured team. There were news people all over the campus. There was some crazy win streak, 3 state titles in 4 years. And most of the basketball players had graduated the year before, so this was going to be a rebuilding year. But many of my teammates from the soccer team played, and back then, it's still kind of true now, everyone played everything. So I was excited about the opportunity to stay connected with those friends and have a new role on this team and have something to do in kind of those dark, yucky winter months that were always really tough for me. And of course, another excuse to delay homework. Being the basketball manager gave me a sense of purpose and belonging. Sandy and her assistant coach and partner, Kivon, and their coaching staff really embraced me. I had a significant role. I sat on the bench between the coaches. I did very important stats. She'd look at my stats during all the timeouts, ask me about them at halftime. I felt really centered on that team. The bus rides, locker room talks, I didn't know it at the time, but this is really where I started learning how to become a coach. Fast forward to another spring lacrosse season. I do not think we won more than 2 games. We were so bad, but I really loved it and started taking it more seriously. Finally, my senior year arrived, and wow, I remember it like it was yesterday. Day 1, we came to campus right across the street early because soccer began in August. I wasn't the captain, but I knew my role in the team was important. I was on varsity, and we'd been getting better over the past couple of years, and I walked up to the field with my senior friends and teammates thinking we were just hot you-know-what. And on the field, there were these unbelievable freshmen. There were 5 of them. They were doing all sorts of tricks and kicking the ball around, maneuvers, and it looked like they were in the middle of a drill. I thought, okay, I am never getting off the bench. And I looked at my friends, I was like, none of us were. We are all getting demoted immediately. But from going kind of the middle of the pack on the team to maybe the worst player on the team, it didn't really stop me from trying to figure out my place and the role that I would play on this team. Our coach valued, our contributions and made it clear to everyone that we all mattered and were important. That season, the freshmen were awesome. They were our Lakeside version of the Fab Five. But they needed us because we were older and we had more experience and we could have their backs when they started to get down on themselves. And that year, the combination of their skills and our leadership, we won the state championship for the first time in the school history. It was an amazing feeling. Senior season of basketball came and went. We had rebuilt and made it to the state tournament. I cried and cried when it was over. I had loved being the manager so much. Then came the spring, my last season of Lakeside sports and lacrosse. It came and went too. I got to play with my sister. I had a great time with my friends, and maybe we finished with a few more wins and losses. Then I turned in my last uniform and started to enjoy my last few weeks at Lakeside. And this brings me to an important point. So many of the experiences that I just shared have been able to, I've been able to see many of you, watch you on the field, the courts, the track, the pool, over the past 4 years. And I've seen you as you have led, supported, cried, celebrated on your teams and with your teammates. Last year, when spring sports were shut down, it was the first time in my 28 years that I didn't have lacrosse. It was crushing. And for many of you, athletes, you know exactly how I felt. And it was you who watched the seniors last year lose something so precious to them. And it was you who picked them up. You found a way to celebrate and honor them, and it was you who would wait and wait and wait to see how your senior year would unfold. You took care of your team's version of the Fab Five. Some of you managed a team and took care of all the stuff behind the scenes. It was you who stood tall and proud representing our school as you were finally able to get back out and compete. It was you who offered to teach our younger players new skills and to get them involved with a sport they may not have even tried in the past. It was you who led our teams during all of the COVID protocols to ensure our play was safe. It was also you who dealt with a lot of adversity, from losing a fellow student athlete to overcoming personal struggles, coming to campus weekly for COVID testing, and maybe for some of you it was just trying to postpone your homework. But through all of this, you stayed connected, you kept looking forward, you had so much pride and determination and courage. You have led all of our teams out of one of the most challenging times we will ever face in athletics and in the history of the school with this global pandemic. I am thankful for the opportunity to reflect on my high school sports experience with you, and I hope that you can all take the time to do your own reflections on the meaning and importance of your sports journey here at Lakeside. You never know when you might come back up here and coach one day. We thank you so much for all of your dedication and commitment, and we have loved coaching you, and hope you come back and stay connected with us for many years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Miss Asaka. Lovely words, as always. And I echo what Miss Asaka said. My speech is not going to be so much about sports or anything like that, but I echo what Miss Asaka said for all of you that I've gotten to know and some of the few of you that I've had the privilege to coach for 4 years. As I told my football seniors and all of you that I know it's been a privilege. So thank you for all of that. I am actually going to use the next few minutes of your time to give you a warning about your futures. A word of caution, perhaps, but advice that you didn't ask for nonetheless. There is going to be a phrase that people will start to use once you get to college or once you venture onto whatever your next chapter is. It's a simple 3-word phrase, and they're going to say it at you. People will say it at you with the best of intentions. At least I think it's the best of intentions. Mostly adults, long into their professional careers, thinking they're giving you some kind of advice or guidance. Yes, I realize I'm an adult, long into my professional career, thinking that I'm giving you some kind of advice or guidance. You see, this phrase that you'll hear repeatedly started working its way into an everyday occurrence when I was in college, by my parents, by my family members, even some of my professors. They'd say, Mike, enjoy these college years while you got them, because pretty soon you'll enter, and here it comes, the real world. I hate it. I hate it right now, but I didn't originally hate it. In fact, originally I appreciated the warning. I will, I thought, in fact, enjoy these next 4 years before I have to go get a job and pay bills and whatever other stereotypically adult things adults have to do. I thanked people for the warning, and I enjoyed my college years with the chip on my shoulder that I only had 4 years to enjoy them before things got real. I went to a small state college in Pennsylvania called Mansfield University, where I played football. And by the first semester of my sophomore year, I'd officially declared as an English literature major, and eventually I specialized in early American literature and language. And in those classes is where I met Dr. John Ulrich, then the English department chair of Mansfield University, and now the acting president of Mansfield University, and to this day, probably the coolest guy I've ever met. Quick side story about Dr. Ulrich. He grew up in Washington, D.C., right about the same time as the quickly blooming counterculture era, which would eventually give rise to American punk rock music He grew up listening to the bands called the Slicky Boys and Bad Brains and Minor Threat and the Velvet Monkeys and other bands you've never heard of. And even through his long, distinguished career in higher education, he remained a real punk rocker at heart. He has really long black hair that he keeps in a ponytail during professional hours, and these authentic, straight from the venue, giant punk rock show posters that are hung in his office. Some of them are semi-inappropriate. I'd hang out in his office, we'd talk baseball, and he'd make fun of me for liking bands like Radiohead or the White Stripes that were too pretentious for his taste. We kept in close touch since I left Mansfield, and he was just recently named the acting president of Mansfield University. So when I texted him to say congratulations, he said that at precisely 2 p.m. Pacific time on June 30th, when he officially takes over, I should blast the song Not Great Men, an anthem by a British punk rock band called Gang of Four. Not Great Men is Gang of Four's musical response to Scottish historian Thomas Carlyle's great man theory. Thomas Carlyle as being one of Dr. Olick's main research interests. Then, an hour after I received that text, I got another one stating simply, BTW, RIP Andy Gill, the lead singer of Gang of Four, who died last year. Again, Dr. Ulrich, one of the coolest people I've ever met. I took a class Ulrich offered called The Theory and Criticism of Literary Theory and Criticism. Essentially what we read is what people wrote about writers and what they wrote about, and apply their same methods of criticism and review to their own writing. Super interesting stuff. In one of those classes, we discussed a lot of Jean Baudrillard's work, Jean Baudrillard being a French philosopher who often discussed and wrote about the relationships between reality and society. And I remember him specifically asking our class in the middle of one of those lectures, who here has heard the phrase, the real world? Of course, my hand went up in the air. Some hands were already going up in the air. Great. Of course I'd heard of it. That was the warning people were giving me about paying bills and having a bad back and sitting in traffic and all the other adult stuff that adults do that us fancy kids with our student loans and our giant textbooks don't have to deal with. He followed up, who can tell me what's not real about the world you're living in? Everybody thought for a minute before a classmate chimed in saying something along the lines of college not being a realistic interpretation of the real world, that we're protected and academic and have safety nets, and that the real world didn't have those things. Maybe true. Maybe true that post-college you are a little bit more responsible for yourself, but that doesn't change the reality of the world you're living in. And it certainly doesn't make the things you believe, the things you feel, or the person you are less real. This hour-long lecture in a literature class is where my mind was changed, and to be perfectly honest with you, where my life was changed. So I'll get right to the point. When adults tell kids that they haven't quite gotten to the real world, to me, that's denying your place in the world, your existence in the present world. To tell an 18 or 19 or 20 or 21-year-old kid that they're not yet in the real world is to deny the power that an 18 or 19 or 20 or 21-year-old kid has on the world. It denies the present that you currently occupy, and it denies that you have any grasp on reality or the world. So what is the real world anyway? I would say the world you're living in right now is the real world. This one, right now, where you're sitting there under this gigantic tent next to your classmates that you spent a lot of time with. Circumstances don't change that. Experiences had or about to be had don't change that. The world you presently occupy at any given moment is the real world. So don't deny that you're in it. Be in it. Be in it as much as you possibly can. Take a deep breath. Everybody right now, take a big, deep breath. You deserve it. You've earned it. Feel the seat that you're sitting in. Feel the air on your skin. Hear the sounds that you hear, not just my voice, but the other sounds that you hear. Be in this moment as much as you possibly can. Try your best to bring yourself right here to this moment. Be in it as much as you can possibly be in it. Sorry. We practice this every day on the football team, so those guys are going to roll their eyes at me. But we do. We use this sort of visual chart on the football team where you can picture a chart with an X and a Y axis, and the X axis represents time, the left being the past and the right being the future, and the Y axis represents your human emotion, the top representing optimism, the bottom representing pessimism. And at any given moment, you can be anywhere on that graph. If you're in the top left, that means you're pumped about something that happened in the past. Maybe you just nailed a great test, or you had a great first date, or you had an awesome time with your friends earlier that day. If you're in the bottom right, you're worried about what might happen. A test you didn't study for, or an intimidating job interview. The key is to identify that, then to practice the same thing we all just did together. Take a deep breath, feel and hear and see and sense the things around you, and bring yourself back to as close to the crosshairs of that graph as you can possibly be. The crosshairs, of course, representing the completely neutral present. Just existence. Just being. Use that and practice it throughout your life in various situations. To me, that's where the real world is. It's the center of a graph. It's the things you feel right now. It's the place you're at right now. It's not where you're going, or where you've been, or what might happen, or what did happen. It's not bills and student loans and jobs and other adult stuff that adults do. And for you especially, it's not Lakeside anymore, or the WCC, or the Accelerated Honors Pre-Calc BC honors test that you took, or no homework weekends, or football games, or senior art shows, or drama performances. The real world is happening right now. So stay there as long as you possibly can, and as often as you possibly can. And when you find yourself out of it, bring yourself back to it. And when someone inevitably says something about the real world, you'll know that you're right where you're supposed to be. So, to finish up my speech, I'll leave you in the most cliche way possible with this final quote. Remember when I was a child, I looked for things all the while. I looked left and I looked right. But look at where I am today. Not bad, not bad. I guess it never mattered where I looked, because look where I am today. R.I.P. Andy Gill, lead singer of Gang Floyd. Thank you.
A quick round of applause again. Keep it going for Jamie and Mike. One of the greatest gifts that I'm given as the director of athletics is to work with people like Mike and Jamie. As all of you know who have worked closely with either of them, they are much more than a coach, and you heard that in their speeches. And I encourage you in this last week that you're here, if you heard something that you like, take the time to go up and talk with them. But thank you to both of you for that. Last thing right here, no tailgates, so you didn't get any swag. I had a little money left in the swag budget, so I have a gift here for anybody who would like to come and grab it. Thank you for all you did. Enjoy your evening, and go Lions.
All right, everybody, can we give them one more giant round of applause?